In this video, I want to step through a quick scenario to give examples of adhesive decision making and then answer questions. My channel is mostly about bookbinding, the making of new books from new materials, rather than rebinding, restoration, or conservation. There is a lot of overlap between these areas, but they are different. When designing a book, think in terms of glue, paste, and mix. Don't think about Elmer's, jade, methylcellulose, or Zen shofu. Decide if you need a glue which is strong, flexible, fast tacking and dry, or a paste that is slow, penetrating and wet. Or do you need something in between? This simplifies the design process by separating the sometimes confusing adhesives procurement process away from the book. I strongly believe simplification leads to better work. If you can find a small number of adhesives that satisfies your glue and paste requirements, let's say 2, it's as simple as you can get. Of course, my recommendation and what I use is a quality PVA or EVA for glue and methylcellulose for paste, and a 60-40 mix as my default. Because of the diversity of my work, I do use other adhesives, and I'll try and discuss this when answering questions, but this approach might meet all the adhesive needs of many people. A good example of adhesive use is in the rounded and back case binding project. This was the first full project I did videos on, and I'm sorry about the loud music in these early videos. The first use of adhesive in this project is on the spine. The spine is the most exercised part of the book, having to flex each time the book is opened. It requires something that is strong and flexible, and this is glue. Before the synthetic glues came about, an animal protein adhesive would have been used. If you've ever cleaned off the spine of a pre-mid-20th century book, you're probably familiar with the wet dog smell. Next is making the case and covering the boards. Turning in the covering material around the edges of the boards could be a long and tedious process if you had to hold or press them in place for long periods of time. And the covering material will stretch due to the moisture in the adhesive, and as this dries it will pull and warp the boards. So this needs to be minimized by using an adhesive with less moisture. So far everything is pointing to glue. But if you are doing a half binding with the diagonal corner pieces, positioning of these pieces and the board paper that fills in between the spine and the corners can be tricky, and you may need to reposition. Using straight glue could be risky in this case, and thus a mix is a very good option. Maybe you could use mix for initially positioning and attaching the pieces to the board, and then swap to glue for the turn-ins. The last job is the riskiest step of all, casing in. Adhesive will be applied to the outer end paper with the book in position in the case, and the board brought over and closed onto the now wet end paper. The book could move as the case is closed, or wrinkles could form in the end paper, and if glue is used there is little chance of recovery. Also, if the boards have warped outwards, you'll want to use the paste down to balance the pull of the covering material to get finished flat boards. Using a wet adhesive to maximize the stretch of the outer end paper will do this. Everything is pointing to using paste for casing in. Of course, this is a simple book where everything goes right. Maybe after making the case, the boards are dead flat and the type of paper used for the end papers is very stretchy. If paste is used, the paste down might overpull and the boards might be forever warped inwards. But because you've done this process many times, you decide to use mix to minimize the inward pull of the boards. In one of my cased book projects, I demonstrated using mix or straight PVA for casing in. You never see me open the finished book. It's either open or closed, and that's because I cased the book in upside down. I of course edited out the moment when I realized this and tried to remove the book from the case, and the paste down started to tear. If I'd been using paste, I'd have easily have got the book out of the case and would have been able to recase it in the right way up. Now it's time for questions. I was going to answer these questions talking to camera, but I've chickened out at the last moment. I'm going to blame the poor sound quality due to my cheap camera not having a microphone input. Instead, you can watch some sewing while I answer these questions. Brad asks, what's the difference between PVA and EVA? PVA is polyvinyl acetate and EVA is ethylene vinyl acetate. They're polymers, or copolymers in the case of EVA, which have different molecular structures but similar adhesive properties. The key difference for a bookbinder is that the dry EVA can be reversed with water. One of the key requirements of conservation work is reversibility. For this reason, EVA is often used as a glue on spines. But reversibility is often misunderstood. Just because an adhesive is reversible doesn't make your work reversible. Conservation work is about knowledge and skill as much as materials. The adhesive properties of PVA and EVA are not identical, but they're fairly similar. I've used a wide range of PVAs and EVAs commonly used in bookbinding, and in general, the PVAs are fast attacking and easier to work with, which leads to the next question: why do you use EVA instead of PVA? Till Desmo left a comment to this question. I think it's because of the solubility, making it easier to fix mistakes that aren't noticed until after the glue sets. No, I almost never reverse EVA to fix mistakes. Most of the steps when I might make a mistake usually aren't reversible. I think we over-restore books. I believe a lot of history is being lost by well-intentioned amateurs and even professionals restoring books that have undergone normal wear for their age. I would much prefer people make protective enclosures. So I make a lot of enclosures. About 4 years ago, I read a study of the degradation of PVA and EVA adhesives that found that PVA in warm conditions off-gassed acetic acid, which produced an unacceptable microenvironment inside storage boxes. The study found EVA produced significantly less acetic acid. Based on this, I started using EVA for all my enclosures, but I was still using PVA for new books. At some point, I started to run out of both PVA and EVA. I like to keep things simple, and I was sick of having two types of glue on the bench, so I decided to just use EVA for everything. And that leads into Ian's question, is EVA better than PVA? I don't think this has a clear answer. If I only made new books, I would probably use PVA because I think it's easier and faster to use. But I make clamshell enclosures for pre-19th century books regularly, and I think EVA is clearly better for this. Therefore, I recommend PVA to start out with. Someone new to bookbinding should not be doing anything except gentle cleaning with a soft brush of any pre-20th century books. So a Mad Reason asks, what is archival and acid-free? They're mostly marketing terms. Hopefully acid-free means the pH is around neutral. What conservators really look for are adhesives that have passed industry standard tests, such as aging tests or the photographic activity test, and published studies in the professional conservation literature. Just having museum grade on the bottle is not enough. Having said that, when starting out, a PVA that says it's archival is fine. Polo asks, what is the difference in types of jade adhesive? Jade 403 is a well-studied and widely used general-purpose PVA in bookbinding. If you're in North America, this is the glue I think you should start with. Jade R is an EVA and thus reversible, and if I lived in North America, this would probably be my standard glue. I've not used the other jades. The thick jade might be 403 with less water and thus fast tacking, and I'm not sure about jade 711. Leo asks, how do you tell what type of PVA or otherwise is in a glue? EVA is sold as PVA, but they're different. You can't unless the manufacturer tells you. At some point you have to pick a product that you trust and just stay with it. Amanda asks, why are some PVAs water soluble after drying and some not? I would guess that any PVA that can be reversed with water is an EVA. A Mad Reason asks about making PVA from granules. I guess this is a bit of a thing. I've not seen it on the internet. And my answer is no, just don't do it. Making a synthetic adhesive is not like making paste. It's a complex process requiring a lot of control to produce a quality product. It's just not worth it. Jim asks about rubber cement and glue sticks. I guess I don't want you to think that I'm against different adhesives in general. It's just for working with paper and board for books that I suggest using a few select adhesives. I use rubber cement for leather work. I use it to attach leather to wood to make strops, but it uses really unpleasant solvents, and I really wouldn't use it on a book. As for glue sticks, I worry about the long-term stability of the adhesives. I put some labels on boxes years ago using a glue stick because I wanted a dry adhesive. The labels all fell off after about 6 months. But in general, I'd trust adhesives in a glue stick as much as I trust a PSA or pressure sensitive adhesive. For people not in the know, pressure sensitive adhesives or PSAs are the adhesives used with a carrier to make sticky tape. PSAs are evil. They are notorious for degrading over time and becoming extremely fugitive, leaking out from under the carrier and through many sheets of paper, causing irreversible damage to the paper as it goes. I'll come back to this. But here is an example of what an innocent, poor choice of an adhesive can do. I visited the State Library of the Northern Territory, one of the states of Australia, and found that every single book in the reference collection had been covered in a plastic film attached on the inside with sticky tape. The PSA had become extremely fugitive, attacking the inside of the boards and migrating many pages into the book. Every single book at the time this was done, most of the books in the library have this problem. This is one of the largest and most important libraries in Australia. I'm sure at the time it seemed a good idea, and how much could possibly go wrong? An intervention meant to protect the books caused more damage than hordes of careless users. Jim also asks about dry mount, specifically the tissue and Daniel Clem and the innovative book design. So I really dislike dry mount. It can't be reversed, and undry mounting something is a major job. I just think it's a bad idea. But it brings up an interesting point about experimental and innovative book design. For me, a book's primary goal is to store and convey information. But book arts have made the vague shape of the book an art object, or even the unthinkable of cutting books up to make sculpture. I don't really have an answer to this, and since I don't use these types of materials, I probably won't develop a strong opinion about it, but I do feel sorry for the conservators of the future. Anna asks about plastic-free adhesive. Well, paste is easy, wheat starch or flour paste or methyl cellulose, no plastic involved. Glue is more difficult. I think an animal protein adhesive would be the best bet, maybe gelatin is the easiest option. Anna asks about methyl cellulose. Does it go off quickly? Are projects using it less long-lived? Well, methyl cellulose is great because it doesn't go off like starch-based adhesives. Once these paste adhesives are dry, they're no longer susceptible to microbial action unless they're kept in a humid environment, in which case the paper will go mouldy also. Okay, so there's lots of questions about Elmer's glue from Cody, Michaela, lots of people. Questions like, what's the difference between PVA and just regular craft glue? I find PVA is ridiculously expensive in Canada. I'm told that PVA is just regular old Elmer's craft glue, but I know it's not. Okay, so in terms of Canada, there is a bookbinding supplier, George Hill, and their PVA is affordable. I will do a short video on Elmer's. I'm going to change my advice on using Elmer's school glue. When you first start, sure, use it, but once it becomes a hobby, swap to a better PVA, and I'll explain more in a short video. So there's a request for guidance on laminating from Corey and Brad asks about controlling pull with moisture, and Nightbird asks about adjusting pull with different adhesives. Well, I have an entire video talking about this. Maybe from the title it isn't obvious, how to make flat boards. but it covers the general rules of thumb like applying adhesives to the thinner material or applying adhesive to the material close to the center of the book, or how paste will cause materials to stretch more than glue and thus pull more. Nightbird asks about the drying times of different adhesives. Matulin asks about PVA drying too fast, is it too thin? And Luturo asks, I'd like to know how to distribute uniformly the glue. I always end up with a dry part at the moment of gluing. Glue dries faster than paste. When I glue or paste something out, I generally go over it twice. The first time sizes the surface and the second time applies the adhesive that will stick the two surfaces together. Paper and board can be very thirsty. The first layer of paste might almost be completely absorbed by the paper or board, or it might suck enough of the moisture out of glue to make it dry very quickly. The second coat will usually not suffer the same fate and will give you more time to work. I usually stipple for glue and brush radially for paste. If the PVA you're using is still drying faster than you can glue out, you can add maybe 10% methyl cell or maybe a little bit of water if the PVA has got very thick. Which reminds me, PVA comes in about the right thickness from the store. I would not recommend adding water to it. You should give it a regular stir as it does settle and become thin on top. And water does evaporate from an open glue pot and your PVA will start to get thick with time. When you notice this, just stir in enough water to get it back to the original thickness. Brad asks about nori paste. Yamato nori paste is made with a tapioca starch and it uses sodium benzoate as a preservative and it contains a small amount of alum. I think it's mostly used by some independent bookbinders for paper repair. My good friend in Vietnam asks about pre-cooked or cold mix starch pastes. There is a range of cold mix or ready-made pastes aimed at bookbinders that are usually starch or dextrin based, which are fairly common, especially in commercial bookbinding. Gain Brothers and Lane have Yes paste, and that's an example of a dextrin based paste. These usually have a preservative in them to stop them going bad. Otherwise, they're fairly much the same as starch paste. These have been used in bookbinding long enough that you can be comfortable there are no major long-term issues with their use. However, for me, they're no easier to get than methyl cell, and they're usually more expensive, so I'd still recommend methyl cellulose. I'm not sure what advice to give on these and nori paste without talking about risk analysis, which I don't want to get into. When you start out, I think it's best to follow someone's advice. My advice on paste is to use methyl cell for general purpose work, wheat flour paste for traditional leather binding, and refined wheat starch paste for paper repair. Or you follow someone else's advice, and that might include using nori paste for general paper jobs and paper repair, and cold mix paste for leather. But you have to start somewhere. Once you've used the materials and got used to them, you might do a workshop with someone that uses different adhesives. Now you can make an informed comparison and you might change. I used to use refined starch paste for everything. By the time you reach this point, you won't be asking someone like me what to use on a rare or valuable piece of paper compared to a school library book. You'll know what to use and most importantly, why. You have to put in the time to learn these things. Like swimming, you can't learn bookbinding just by reading about it. Brad asks about wheat flour versus wheat starch, and Montemay asks about leather adhesive. Wheat flour paste is a stronger adhesive than refined starch adhesive. I have a video where I talk about this. I use wheat flour paste for leather because of the added strength. But the gluten in wheat flour paste can stain paper, whereas wheat starch paste dries clear. So wheat flour paste for leather and wheat starch paste for paper repair. So this is why I think wheat flour paste being stronger is true. I bound a leather journal for my wife years ago, and the leather on the spine lifted after a while, producing a noticeable bubble on the spine. Once I started looking, this seemed to happen to some extent in about 1 in 5 leather bindings I did. Most times it was hardly noticeable, but it was really annoying. I haven't seen any sign of this since swapping to wheat flour paste. There are some situations I will use EVA for leather, but it's rare and I just mention it for full disclosure. Kirk is still having trouble making paste. I'm going to make another video on making paste where I talk about the results of a study into different preparation methods for making starch-based paste. I know Kirk is not the only person that has trouble with this. Too much emphasis is placed on the so-called recipe. It's starch and water mixed and then cooked. It's hardly a recipe. Not enough time is spent on the process. One of the findings of this study is that a step after cooking the paste, the straining and kneading, can improve weak paste no end. I think this step is often skipped and is underrated. Raphael asks about which type of paste, for which purpose. I think I've answered that, so I might skip on. And then, oh my goodness, Igazevanogonomes, I have no idea how to say that, asks about cornstarch for paste. Is it different to flour? I have tried it and I thought it was weak and brittle, but others have told me it works really well. So I don't know what to say about it. I think if it works for you, then it's fine to use. So Kirk asks about different types of animal protein adhesives, and Carl asks about historical geographical overview. I'm on a steep learning curve with animal protein adhesives myself. Once I feel my knowledge and experience using it is good enough, I'll make a video on the subject, but I will keep Patreons up to date with my adventures in using these types of glues. There was a great chart showing the timeline of the use of different adhesives over time, published in the Guild of Bookworkers newsletter recently. I might try and get permission to share this. A Mad Reason asks about tearaway notepads. Making tearaway pads is called padding and is often done by the printer since it's such an easy process requiring very little equipment. In commercial environments, a specific adhesive is used for this purpose called padding compound, but PVA and even 2 coats of Elmer's school glue will do the job. I'm making a short video on padding which will be out in the next couple of weeks. Nightbird and Amanda ask, what additives should or could you use? What are the most problematic additives and why? I've said I use oil of cloves to prolong the life of starch paste, but really I hardly ever use it now. I used to use it all the time and for many years, but I generally just avoid any additives if I can. A good PVA and methyl cellulose is all you need. Tabitha asks about shelf stability. Well, PVA and methyl cellulose are very shelf stable, and PVA can last years and methyl cellulose months once made up and years while still a dry powder. If PVA freezes, it's ruined. And for wheat starch paste and flour paste, I'd just rather use fresh batches than add preservatives. James, Nashvillan and Marcial have similar questions. Can you use PVA for restoration work? Do you need to use hide glue, or is it acceptable to use modern adhesives for antiquarian books? It's common to use a conservation layer on the spine for restoration work, and the two I'm familiar with are a layer of starch paste and Japanese paper, or refined gelatin with or without Japanese paper. This provides a reversible layer. Then EVA can go over these, giving the spine lining strength, and which should be reversible, allowing one to get water to the conservation layer if required in the future. If you'd used PVA, then the paper lining becomes important. To reverse the conservation layer, the PVA would need to be removed by delaminating the paper. I think keep the hide glue for models and don't put PVA directly onto the spine for restoration jobs. Andrew and Alex ask about using rabbit skin glue and whether you need to add glycerin for flexibility and how much. I don't think it needs it, but my experience and knowledge is limited. One manufacturer suggests 5% by weight. Matthew has an interesting question. I would like to know more about why some adhesives such as PVA glue will not adhere to some surfaces, such as the backside of certain photo papers. Well, it's rare that PVA won't stick to a paper or anything, but I would assume that the coating for this paper is simply non-stick. I do have a small quantity of PVA sold by one of the commercial bookbinding suppliers that sticks to just about everything. It's not available in retail quantities, so this doesn't really help you. Photo papers are problematic for other reasons too. Sorry, I don't have a good answer to this. Look for a flexible adhesive that has a pH above 6. I think you'll just have to take a risk on this one. Gingiat wants a list of material types, name brand recommendations and supplier links for guidance. As best I can, I'll put this in the description. Franksy Kitty Games asks, what alternatives for paste? Starch not available for book cloth in Cape Town. For book cloth, I'd just use wheat flour paste. Any colour change due to the gluten isn't going to be noticeable with patterned or coloured cloth. John asks about using Mod Podge. Well, Mod Podge is like Elmer's. Who knows what's in it, but it sticks things together, and when you're just trying bookbinding out, that's all you need. Once bookbinding is a hobby, I recommend you move towards adhesives commonly used by the bookbinding community, which is not the same as the online crafting community. C.A. McDivitt asks, what adhesives should a beginner buy when first setting up? So this is my chance to reinforce the message and wrap up. I'm assuming the beginner has progressed past trying bookbinding out and wants to make this a significant hobby. Don't start from the viewpoint of, I have an adhesive, can it be used for bookbinding? Buy a glue and a paste used by the bookbinding community. The glue might be Jade 403 and the paste methyl cellulose, but you might decide to use Jade R and Nori paste, or PVA M289 from Hewitt's and Yes paste. Once you run out of one of these, maybe try another. After a few years, you may have found your favourites. There'll be some people that this advice won't be helpful for. The best I can recommend is to look for a white glue that is likely to be PVA that has a neutral pH. Avoid glues advertised for use with wood or plastic. And for paste, I'd suggest wheat flour paste, and you'll just have to make a new batch when you need it. I feel like I've been a bit repetitive on this subject. Maybe the Q&A format wasn't as easy as I expected. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the like button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. To find videos I've made on specific topics or other projects, the best place to go is the Daz Bookbinding Video Guide. It's the index to the channel. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button and select the notification bell. Until next time, cheerio.